Hello everyone, nice to see you here. My name is Marja. I'm an architect working in Zagreb, so I'm gonna have this presentation about architecture in Metaverse, but from an architecture perspective, since I'm at home there, in Metaverse not so much, at least not yet. We're gonna start with basic questions about what is architecture. So we have to know what a definition to know what are we talking about. So architecture is basically the art and technique of designing buildings which are distinguished from the skills that are needed from construction. So our basic education has changed. We have a little bit of identity crisis. Since we used to be master builders, we built everything from offices, squares, cities. Now we have cut our vocation in different like branches, so everyone has their own piece. Construction workers, electrical workers, city planners, landscape architects. So we are stuck with some kind of identity crisis, I think. So that's architecture. Architecture is basically everywhere. So from an office building, from your school, from your hospital. So it's everywhere around you, and it shapes you more than you think. It shapes your whole world, your whole culture in your build. And but now we are going to go next on what is. This is just some of the examples. So what is architecture? So we have Eiffel Tower, we have Temple of Athena, known as the Pantheon, in different historical times. So we have Jardin Majorel, that's also a botanical garden in Marrakech that is made in the 30s and with a cubist villa inside. Also Le Corbusier's, one of the most famous, if you know architects in the history, made this chapel for Virgin Mary in Rouchamp in the rural of France. This is a UNESCO heritage site now. This is also architecture, so it's a basic suburban house in any town, USA. Also, but for example, this is a remarkable piece of architecture, Michelangelo's St. Peter's Basilica and Bernini's St. Peter's Square. So this is all architecture. But what is good and what is bad architecture? So how can we define that? I think that through the times that hugely changed. So what we think now, what good architecture is not what people thought 500 years ago what was good architecture. So we have this, I will just show you a few examples so you got a hunch. So this is a Vienna State Opera, now a famous building which we learn in architecture school. It's a first huge building infrastructure, a huge public building made on Vienna's Ringstrasse. That's a famous boulevard surrounded by trees, which was built in the 19th century on the old medieval walls, which were cut down and demolished in Vienna, and they decided to make a huge boulevard with the public buildings. This was made in the end of the 19th century, so just 20 years before Eiffel Tower. It's a totally different universe. And this building that we see now as iconic in Vienna was made by August Sicard von Sicardburg and Edward van der Nul, but when it was starting to get done, then Emperor Franz Joseph was not very happy and pleased, so he made a lot of bad comments about the exterior and the interior of the building, resulting in the architect's suicide and the other architect's heart attack. So none of the architects lived to see their building be done. Now we see this as a good architecture. This is a totally different example. From Paris, this is Centre Georges Pompidou, famously or popularly known as the Beaubourg. It hosts the Modern Museum now, and it was made by an international competition in the 70s, a first competition that wanted to invite international architects in France in the 70s, and Richard Rogers and Renzo Piano, now famous architects, then just anarchist youth, won the competition. If you can see the difference between architecture of Paris, which was quite bourgeois and with their mansards and cute balconies, they made a flip-out, inside-out building, which had all of their constructions, or their plumbing, or the fire extinguishers, everything that's used to hide in the building, they put it outside. So they made a facade of the things that we usually want to hide, and even color coded it. So the blue, the yellow was plumbing, the red was fire extinguisher, the blue was ventilation, and so on, so on. There was huge protests about this building, so people were shocked and appalled and said that this wasn't something the Paris should have ever. But the city council and everything were supportive. So, of course, with some budget cuts, so this building was supposed to have movable floors, so you can go around the floors and they would move, adjusting to where you want to be at the beginning. But of course, in the 70s, they cut the budgets to a minimum, but still they have a building that is now iconic and hosts millions of visitors yearly. This is just. Later, these architects won Pritzker Prize, which is like an Oscar in architecture. So this is just an example of what good architecture means. It's not always the same, I want to tell. But some of the bullets, what good architecture really is, and what should we pay attention to when designing is consistent design throughout the whole building. So that means that when you're designing the building, you should be aware for who and for whom and for what are you designing. When I say building, I mean park, I mean a botanical garden, I mean a hospital, I mean your own room. So it has to have a consistent throughout the building. Does it have the same flow? Does it have the same story? Does the concept and the idea go from the big picture to the small picture, to the door handles, to the communication lines? That's very, very important. Second is validation of context is site. That means that we should always have in mind where and for who are we building again. It's not always the context is not always you cannot always like in some temporary buildings you cannot always pay attention to the context, but usually when you start building it's important. Are you doing it in Marrakesh or are you doing it in United States of America? When doing temporary buildings such as like Serpentine Gallery in Hyde Park in London, then you know you're designing a temporary building and you just want to show your work as good as possible. So functionality is never subordinate. There's a famous saying by an American architect, Louis Salvan, that says form follows function. So it's not a form that is just for form. You should not design based on what you like. You should design by, if you have a facade with a window on it, so it means that in that room someone needs light and air. So you have to have function always on your mind. But what about the metaverse? We have some few spaces or worlds in the metaverse that are now known widely. There's like Somnium Space, Sandbox, and the Centerland. As you can see, they have the same, very similar aesthetics. When we talk about metaverse, we want to know how does it work. So how do you build your house in the metaverse? So basically, the same as in the normal world. You have a map of your continent, or your state, where you just pick land what you like. So if you want to be near this Atari Eiffel Tower, you are going to pay your plot a lot more than if you want to be secluded on the end. So you buy a land with your cryptocurrency, and you start working. You start by modeling your 3D and using whatever 3D you want or whatever 3D you're best in. Me, I'm using SketchUp. This is my domain, and I'm looking at a good plugin. But then you can make this. You can make this Lego-like mansion in Metaverse, where you can, like Snoop Dogg made, and he made the Snoopverse, but he's going to throw, you see, parties and have art exhibitions there and stuff like that. He made copy of his California home, and he put it in Metaverse. The answer to the question, how did you become his neighbor, is just money. So if you have a lot of money, you can just become anyone's neighbor. It's just easy. Of course, you have to be such a huge fan to pay this kind of money for his neighbor in Metaverse and never see him again. Also, supermodel Sara Sampaio bought an island in the Metaverse, including Ana Ivanovic, Stanislava Wawrinka, and people like that. So I think we have the answer to our questions. As about the land in the real world, in the Metaverse also, money is the key. But trending in Metaverse, let's go back to architecture. If you can see, there's some kind of a similar aesthetic to the end. For me, it's like Sims when we were young, you know. But I'm not sure how did that happen. I think it's still in the making, the 3D processes, because when we do our 3Ds for investors now, we do everything we can to make hyper realistic houses or the things we like. We just design their doorknobs, you know, their chairs, so they would know what are they paying for, what are they living in. And now we have this, like, everything is so still dreamy and Lego-like, what I said. This is Zaha Hadid Architects. If you are familiar with she passed away a few years ago, but her office, run by Patrick Schumacher, is a famous architecture studio. They made a whole city for Liberland, which is a libertarian nation run by no government, and has some. It's in the border of Serbia and Croatia, in a no man's land, and they declared it their own with no regulation whatsoever. But they made a huge city with a city hall, with hyper-realistic cities in which avatars could live and prosper. This is big, very famous Danish architecture groupation called Bjarke Ingels Group. They made an office called Vice Versa for Vice Media Group. It's an organic building, which they call an experimental playground, because in a day they can add or remove a whole floor, which gives them freedom to see and explore what works for them, for their users, what doesn't. Roar Studio is an Emirates-based architecture studio that actually made a studio in the Metaverse. So there's a studio, your avatar can come here and sit with them and ask them to make your building, or to make you an office, or to make your interior, whatever. They're the first one to have just like an office in the architecture office in the Metaverse. Citizen M is the first hospitality group in Metaverse, which bought the land in Sandbox, and now they're going to make they're going to make a virtual hotel. They're going to finance the hotel with 2,000 NFTs. Those NFTs, they're going to sell 2,000 NFTs acquired by people in their real-world hotels. So you can acquire in their hotel, you can acquire an NFT, buy some free drinks, some games, or something like that, and then you can sell it, and then they're going to finance that hotel in the Metaverse. So first hospitality group, which in 2008 built their first ever hotel in the real world in the Amsterdam Schiphol airport. Voxer Architects designed for Fashion Week, designed for their Aurobos. It's a digital fashion label that wanted a rocket-shaped building for their closure night at Fashion Week in Metaverse. And they make also the concept in their clothes. If you see, or this building is the same. It's nature, it's mimicry. It's they have all their inspiration. It comes from nature. Next, and this is my favorite, is Space Popular. Space Popular is an architecture studio that built. They say that there is a quite undemocratic and discriminatory world of locked doors in the Metaverse, so they decided to make digital curtains which allows you to go from one world to another. So there is no doors, there is no clicks, there is no swaps, there is no nothing. You just go to this through this virtual curtain and enter another world. And this curtain is not it's not visible till you reach to touch it. So you want to go somewhere, you reach to touch it, and this portal to another world appears. So they are really enthusiastic. They also made a punto de inflexión. There's the first architectural conference held in Metaverse in the pandemic in the 2020. They based their concept on the because it was on the Barcelona grid line and the Barcelona street architecture. You see these facades. There are all ideas of the Barcelona streets, and you could have an avatar that you can go to that you can take and go to exhibitions, navigate through all the buildings, navigate through the city, and that this was their answer to the basic Zoom conferences they were attending all the time, and they couldn't engage with other people, and they were really, really sad about it. So they made a whole conference in the Metaverse. So what are the pros and cons about in the what we see in the Metaverse? So the pros are definitely no regulation. So you have no regulation in whatsoever. Just the regulation I saw is just in height. So you cannot go indefinitely in height, but everything else you can do whatever you want. And there is no budget. Where there is no budget, you can do whatever you want. But in the cons are no regulation and no budget. So you can, I'm not sure that this is also good for architecture, but when we talk about architecture, we talk about in the real world and Metaverse, we talk about two different things. But still, we have to be careful what we wish. I'm not sure if this is going to play, but I don't know. It's an embedded video of these pros and cons, where a Swedish architecture collective, we architects are very fond of the word collective, but they make a dino-shaped building as a headquarter for the large bank. So this was like in a sitcom, like something that we are mocking about, but I think this no relegation, no budget can really easily lead to this, but hope not. How can architects contribute in this Metaverse? So we are used to do totally different things. So we start our day still with a paper and a sketch. So if you don't think as an artist, sometimes you cannot do architecture. You have to do it by your hand to see what do you want to describe. The value of architecture. We have architecture values that we were in authenticity. So where the Parthenons were built, there were stability, beauty, form. Then we moved to the Renaissance, ornaments, angels. Then we moved to 19th century, when we have industrial age, when we have Eiffel Tower, where it's total different values of architecture. And then to the 20th century, where we had Le Corbusier and his aims of just form, no ornament or such ever. But this is all through the history that we can bring to today and to architecture in Metaverse. So it's not something to, it's something to consider. Architects are a bridge between physical and virtual world. We are, in our job, we are one of the main actors in designing a building, in make it happen in the real world. So we know the processes, we know everything, how everything works, and we can bring that to the virtual world. Also, social responsibility in the virtual world. Everything we build we take from context, we take from a cultural background, and I think our Metaverse architecture should also be very, very inclusive, not to take out anybody. I will just say this also, what can we bring to, this is a famous saying by Rem Koolhaas, who is a most famous modern architects who says that architects can bring memory to the present. So architecture stands with one leg in the world that's 2,000 years old, and we are the only one of the really rare professions that we have a memory from 2,000, 3,000 years old, when we learn how did they build, and we can take that and build and take that knowledge and build it to the future. And I think what architects can bring to the metaverse, which is future, which is Web3, and to the 21st century, is memory. So it's very important, I think. Thank you very much.